It's the new year, and like many others, I got a whole new list of resolutions and prayers for 2025. But instead of writing down my goals like usual, I decided to do something a little bit different this year. New year, new doll body. I get really tired of looking at my old body base, so I decided to update it. I'm giving her vitiligo, which if you don't know is when patches of the skin become lighter due to the loss of melanin. Turns out sculpting feet is just as unpleasant as drawing hands. So, to save myself some frustration, I just heavily modified this file I found off of Thingiverse. I actually started this project very early last year. You may remember seeing some sneak peeks in the community tab. But apparently this doll was a lot more demanding than I originally thought, so I put her on a timeout for a while. One of the problems I had was figuring out how to give her gold wings. At first I used some fabric that I ironed some gold vinyl to. I tried to convince myself that this looked nice, but in reality, I hated it. Next, I tried making the wings out of foam, but this was very time consuming, and the process to get these wings as reflective as I wanted was just entirely too much. So then I tested out using chrome powder on a 3D printed wing, and yes, let's take a moment to appreciate the butterfly. This worked and looked great, but there were definitely a few downsides, and I was still convinced that there was a better way. I finally tried gold leaf, which opened up a whole new world of possibilities. Anyway, at the time I didn't have actual leaf adhesive, so I just used some nail stuff. This again worked great. The only thing is I kinda needed to remake 2 of the wings because I kinda ruined them, and I definitely needed more than what that little bottle was giving. So a trip to the store it is. My mom needed thread while we were there, and I also picked up some gauze fabric that would be perfect for this project and future ones, so it was a very successful trip. I reprinted and updated the wings that I accidentally ruined and can now start working on them. If you're wondering, I actually recycled the old body, which is how Shadow ended up being made. The way this adhesive works is that it goes on a milky white and then when it's ready, it'll be completely clear. Even in its dry state, it's still tacky, which makes it perfect for foil leaf sheets. To give the wings extra protection, I coat them with epoxy resin. After 24 hours, they're ready to be strung onto the top of the torso. The first version of this doll didn't have any horns, which I still don't understand why I made that decision, so this time I'm giving her the horns that she deserves. My parents got me this new set of chalk pastels for Christmas, so of course I have to use them for this project. The color range is so much better than what I was working with before. This was my first face-up of the year, so I was really letting myself play around and learn a bit. One of my goals this year is to make my dolls look not necessarily realistic, but I want them to have more life, especially in their faces. gonna be pretty pale, so I'm painting her eyebrows and eyelashes with a pale tan. This is how her old face looks next to the new version. I think I did pretty well with keeping the parts of the old face that I liked, but I definitely still improved on a lot with the new one. I know some of you probably can't stop looking at those layer lines on her horns, so let's go ahead and cover those with a nice satisfying helping of gold leaf. Kinda jumps a bit here, but now we're at the point where it's safe to add the lashes. These ones are a bit different than the ones I used to use, but I think I like how dramatically fluffy they look. And here's just another comparison. For her eyes, I had first made a pair with a very yellow iris, but then when I tested them in her head, I found that they made her look a little too human and not epic enough. I still liked how the eyes came out, I would just have to save them for a different project. Now that we have most of the body done, we can start putting her together. At this point, the arms and hands were still printing, but those will show up later. For her armor, I actually sculpted the bases in Blender. I simply mask out the shape of the armor that I want, then extract it so it's its own piece. I make sure I set the offset to 1 so that it lays exactly over the body, instead of going through it at certain points. I found that a good thickness to stay around was about 0.6 up to 0.8. At this point, I still wasn't completely sure that the idea I had would work, so I tested the plan out on this extra armor piece. I was inspired by those porcelain corsets everyone loves, but I wanted to put my own twist on it. So then I came up with the idea of making her armor look like it's made out of paper. Each piece of armor is filled with positive and encouraging words to help throughout the year, hence her being a play on the term prayer warrior. I had some leftover tea-dyed copy paper from last time, so I'll be using that to wrap the armor. I printed out the words on water decal paper so I can easily transfer it onto the armor. I didn't print the words directly onto the paper because doing that last time caused a lot of problems, so I had to do it this way. To use this stuff, you basically print out whatever you want on the shiny side of the paper, then coat it in some sort of varnish to make sure that the ink doesn't run. I just used MSC because that's what I had. When it's dry, it's pretty much ready to be dipped in water and used. By itself, the sheet didn't stick well to the paper, so for the actual armor I used a coat of that full sheet adhesive to make sure that it would stick. Also, I don't mind the wrinkles in the paper because it just adds to the effect that I'm going for. To decorate the armor, I'm going to be using these molds I've collected from Temu. I don't show much of this process because it was a nightmare, but basically I did almost the same thing I did for my Telltale Heart doll. For that project though, I was using a very old epoxy, which behaved a lot better with the molds because it was a bit harder. Of course I ran out of that, so I had to use a new batch which was a lot softer. Even after it cured a bit, it was still way too soft to get a clean molded piece. So to get all of those pieces done, I had to put the epoxy in the mold first, then stick it in the freezer for a few minutes to make sure it was hard enough to actually be removed from the molds. Anyway, once I collected all the pieces I needed, I coat them in the famous foil adhesive. To To bring the armor up another level, I do another round of decorating, adding chains to the edges and adding a bit more age to the paper. Side note, for those of you who are familiar with the channel, probably know that I try to make everything as completely waterproof as possible for my dolls. So yes, I put everything I could think of on the paper parts to make sure they could at least survive a little bit of water. I went to the beauty supply store with my mom one day early last year and found these gigantic packs of hair for only 35 cents. The hair is already super straight and each pack comes with enough hair to do at least 2 or 3 big dolls. The process of attaching the hair is pretty much the same as all my other projects. Just dump a whole bunch of glue on the head, then put on the hair and repeat. The clothes are pretty simple, so instead of me struggling to film how I made them, here's a few sketches I put together in Procreate. The sleeves are literally just tapered rectangles that I actually tie on the doll so that I can easily create these bubble sleeves. The skirt is pretty much just 2 panels sewn together. I really wanted the clothes to look like they've been through a lot, so I don't hem most of the edges. Adding on to the roughed edge look, I grab some tea and splatter it all over the fabric pieces. This also helps it look more like the paper armor since now it has subtle shifts in color. Her final detail is the bag. Last thing to do is to write out all of my hopes for 2025, stick it in the bag, and she's done!